So before I start, I just want to let you guys know I love questions. So ask questions. You don't have to wait to the end. I love the interaction. So feel free to ask questions throughout the entire presentation. Just to give you guys a little bit of background on myself, I got my undergraduate degree in Canada. I'm not Canadian, and I didn't really enjoy hockey, but I did like Canada a lot. And then when I came down here, I got my doctorate in Southern California. After I got my doctorate, I became a professor of neurological diagnosis for about a year and a half, and then went into private practice. And ever since I've been into private practice, I've been helping both adults and kids, both neurotypical and with neurological challenges. So it's been quite an experience and quite a ride. Now I have 3 practices, so it keeps me very, very busy. So I entitled this Brain Games, Neuromodulation for Neurological Challenges. So this just came out, the CDC, just a few days ago. They said that more than 1 in 7 American children have mental, behavioral, and developmental disorders. So it's really spiking over the years, over these last few decades. And if you ask the CDC, they don't really have any idea of what's going on. I have my own opinions on what's going on, but they say, oh, maybe dads are getting older, genetic epidemics, all this kind of stuff. But,
what are your opinions?
So what I see happening is a perfect storm of environmental challenges combined with some genetic susceptibilities. So chemical, physical, emotional stresses combined both during pregnancy and during early years in order to create these neurodevelopmental challenges. And there are so many. And one of the talks that I do, I go deep into that. Things like Tylenol during pregnancy, certain medications during pregnancy, immune stimulation during pregnancy, stresses during pregnancy, stresses after birth, using forceps, using C-sections, using antibiotics. It goes on and on and on. So I think it's a perfect storm of things that are really accumulating, including genetically modified foods, which is a big topic these days. Vaccines, absolutely. That's a sensitive topic, but for instance, I'm not shy about it when my daughter's vaccine-free. And I have plenty of parents in my practice that vaccinate and a lot that don't. So I don't really care either way. But when people ask me, I do talks, and I let them know my opinion and my research, and I've done some relatively large talks to some big groups regarding, I just did one on vaccines during pregnancy, and potentially that could be problematic when you stimulate the immune system. And there's a lot of research behind that, so if you guys ever want to see that talk, I could always do that at some point in the future too. So the talk is entitled, what is the talk entitled? What is it called? Brain on Fire, Pregnancy, Vaccines, and Autism. So I talk about how the research has shown that immune stimulation during pregnancy is very problematic, whether it's through a natural infection or through a vaccine. So any kind of immune stimulation during pregnancy, especially in the first 2 trimesters, can be very problematic. There's a lot of research backing that too. And I have an article on GreenMed.info, if you guys know what that is. So, the history of EEG. Do you guys know what an EEG is? Are you familiar with it? A lot of parents with special needs kids do. Electroencephalogram. And it was actually developed by a German scientist named Hans Berger back in the 20s. And he found these brain waves being given off by the brain, these electrical brain waves. And all his friends wanted him to call them Berger waves, but he was pretty modest, so he ended up calling them alpha waves. And that's the first letter in the Greek alphabet, so it was the first wavelength that was discovered, so they called them alpha waves. And you can see that's Hans Berger on top, and then that's one of the old EEG machines. It's changed since then. We've gotten more sophisticated. So this is, for instance, one of the EEGs that I do in my practice. And we cap up, and we use gel still. There are actually some, if you guys are familiar with some of the new EEGs, there's some dry caps now, but they're incredibly expensive. I mean, they run 20 to 25 grand per cap. So usually the universities can really afford that, but private clinicians have a tough time doing that. So I'm still using the gel caps. They work very, very well. And when the price point comes down on those dry electrode caps, I'm going to get those for sure. But this just gives you an idea. You cap up and you look at different points on the skull. This is what's called a 19-channel EEG, and you're looking at the electrical activity given off by the neurons across the entire brain. So this is what when you take the EEG, this is what you get. This is what's called a raw EEG. So you get to see all the different wavelengths, and then these are the actual wavelengths that you're looking at. And if you've ever been to a neurologist, this is what they do. They do a raw EEG and they evaluate it. So we have the slowest wavelengths are what are called delta. Those are the wavelengths you produce predominantly when you're sleeping, when you're in deep sleep. Not REM sleep, not the kind when you're dreaming, but when you're in deep, deep sleep. The very slow wavelengths, that's delta. The next one up is theta. That's when you're coming out of sleep or you're going to sleep, kind of that hypnotic in-between waking and sleeping state. The next up from that is alpha. That's the one that Hans Berger discovered initially. That's when you're awake, but you're just relaxed, right? You're just maybe watching a show, just kind of hanging out. You're not really too focused on anything. The next step up from that are what are called beta waves. That's when you're awake, but really focused on something. Like if you're doing a math problem or something like that, use a lot of beta in order to do that. So it's awake and focused. And then the highest are these gamma waves. And those are really, really interesting. Those, it looks like those are being used now by the brain in order to, for one piece of the brain to talk to another piece of the brain that's very far away. So it's called a binding wave, and it's a really, really interesting wave. And they've done some research on these monks and these Tibetan monks that do meditation, and they are through the roof on their gamma when they start doing their meditation. They just light up in their brains, and it's really, really neat to see. They just turn really bright red. So those are essentially all the different types of waveforms. And remember, delta slowest, then theta, then alpha, then beta, then gamma. Now actually, within this beta is what's called a high beta. So this upper end from 25 to 30 or so, that is usually what happens when somebody's very anxious. So if you have a lot of anxiety, you're going to show a lot of high beta. The lower beta is more the focused attention, but it can be problematic if you show a lot of high beta. And I see that a lot. I'll talk about that in a minute with kids with neurological challenges, particularly kids on the spectrum, autism spectrum disorder. So this is what a neurologist will do. We go deeper though. So we actually get more sophisticated with our analysis, and we turn a raw EEG. So usually neurologists are looking for like what are called phase reversals and stuff like that, epileptiform activity, and these different things on the EEG, but we take it further and we go much, much deeper. We turn the raw EEG into what's called a QEEG, quantitative EEG. What that does, it gives us a brain map. You may have heard of a brain map before. And it gives a lot of information. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into what everything means, but essentially what we can do is we can look for dysregulation within the brain. And if the brain is doing well, this person is doing it a little bit differently than I do it, but essentially you want to see either gray or green. When you see blue, it means that the activity of the brain is too low. There's not enough of that particular waveform. Remember, these are delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta. So when you see blue, there's not enough of that particular brain wave. When you see yellow, orange, or red, that means there's too much, okay? So it's like hot or cold, essentially. So this is a common pattern that I see with kids on the spectrum, and it's very, very common. You see it with almost all kids. You see an increase in the slow waves, as you can see here. See all that orange and yellow and red? And then you often see a decrease in this alpha wave. That's very, very common. So for the relaxed, remember alpha is the relaxed awake state. It's very, very common for them to be deficient here, but then very, very high in this what's called high beta. And you guys remember what high beta is? What that what often shows up with high beta waves? The anxiety, right? So it's a very, very common pattern that I see. A lot of high beta in kids on the spectrum, and also problems you can see down here. You shouldn't see all that. The scalp should be like this. You shouldn't see any color at all. But a lot of these kids on the spectrum and other neurological disorders, they show a lot of high beta activity and not enough alpha. And I could talk about that. You guys may have heard of like alpha stim and stuff like that. I can get into that a little bit later. But that's a very, very common pattern, especially with kids on the spectrum. Yes, absolutely.
Would the brain colors of the brain change throughout the day, though, or would it be pretty much stay the same?
It changes depending on, for instance, sleep, and it can change when your eyes are closed. So we do, depending on the child, how they're able to function. We ideally get a 10-minute eyes open, 10-minute eyes closed. Not all kids can do that, right? Some kids will not do the eyes closed one, so we'll get an eyes open, but it's relatively stable. When you look across, but you will see changes from eyes open to eyes closed, or from being awake to being asleep. So that's why they'll do these 24-hour EEGs on children. Oftentimes they'll send them home, or even adults, and they'll look for epileptiform or epileptic activity.
Because there's changes.
Because there are changes, yeah, when the exception of when your eyes are closed or when you're going to sleep, that's when you see the two big changes. That's a good question. So, I mentioned neuromodulation in the title of my talk. This is what it means, basically. It's inducing neuroplasticity. And you guys may have heard of neuroplasticity, but it's essentially changes in the brain. For a long time, neuroscientists didn't believe that adults' brains could change. They thought it was only kids that the brain would change, but they were fixed after a certain age. They've come to realize with new experiments now that your brain can change throughout your life, and it's called neuroplasticity. And there's different ways to change your neuroplasticity. You can do electrical stimulation, magnetic stimulation, you can use sound, you can use medications, pharmacological, and there's lots of different ways to change the neurological activity and the connections within the brain. But these are some of the most popular here. Select SSRIs you've heard of, they're antidepressants essentially. Well, what was interesting about this is they assumed that depression was a lack of serotonin in the brain, a lack of these neurotransmitters. So they would give these SSRIs, and immediately the SSRIs would increase serotonin levels in the brain, but they weren't seeing a decrease in depression right away. It would take weeks in order for the depression, if it worked at all, in order for the depression to lift. So they started studying this, like, why does this happen? Why can the serotonin levels increase dramatically right away within a few hours to a day, but then you don't see the results for a few weeks? It was because it was actually the SSRIs were changing the brain neuroplastically. New connections were being formed, and you were seeing actual physical and structural changes within the brain and new connections. So that's what neuromodulation or neuroplasticity includes there. Deep brain stimulation, this is a picture of it right there. They go in and do surgery, open up your brain, and put these stimulators in there. It's pretty invasive. And then you may have heard of vagal nerve stimulation. It's used a lot with epilepsy. Basically what they do is they stimulate the vagal nerve. They implant it here in the chest and stimulate the left vagal nerve. And it can be very effective at reducing epilepsy. However, it also is very invasive. And there are other ways to stimulate the vagal nerve without cutting somebody open, very effective ways to do that. So that's what neuromodulation is. It really changes the activity in the brain, and that's what I look to do. So if something's too high, I want to bring it down. If something's too low, I want to bring it up. That's neuromodulation. Okay? Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. So the history of electrical stimulation of the brain. The ancient Egyptians used to use these catfish that would put out 350 volts, and they used to essentially shock people, right, to treat nervous system diseases. Roman doctor used to use torpedo fish. So this is an electric catfish. This is a torpedo fish with 220 volts. If you got anybody here, electrician? Anybody? I know you do sometimes. Is that a lot of volts through the body? Yeah. So they would actually like stand in water. They would put these torpedo fish. Yeah, they would do it in shallow water, and they would essentially electrocute themselves in order to treat some of these certain neurological ailments. And then some Muslim doctors also treated epilepsy doing the same thing, but they would actually place it directly on the person's head and shock them. Yeah, and that's 350 volts. Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Did it work?
Well, yeah, actually, it did. It did. There was some effectiveness to it. If they didn't die, it did. It could. So yeah, if you survived it, it certainly could work. And they did it because they believed back then, evil spirits and stuff like that. So, and I won't comment on that. But well, if you guys has anybody here seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? This is, you guys recognize Jack Nicholson here getting the electroconvulsive therapy, right? So it's burned into my memory when I first saw this. So it was used very prominently in the 1930s, especially in the insane asylums, right? They would use it for bipolar, schizophrenia, depression. The individuals were fully conscious, and the side effects were significant. People would break their bones, right? Because the contractions were so strong, the muscles contracted so hard, they would literally break bones. They would get headaches, obviously. That's one of the least problematic things that happened. Post-traumatic stress disorder. That was a major trauma, so people were getting PTSD. And then major memory loss, so they would have long-term memory issues and loss after this. It did, in some cases, help with some of these issues, but some of the side effects, were significant. In 2011, FDA classified it as the highest risk, but they approved it for depression. So it's still approved, it's still being used right now for depression. It's very different today than it was back in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So they'll put people under general anesthesia and they'll give them muscle relaxants so they don't break their bones, essentially. But there's still pretty significant side effects. Memory loss and headaches are very, very common, especially long-term memory loss.
So they still do it, but they put them to sleep.
They do. They put them to sleep and they basically turn off the muscles so you don't see these big violent reactions except in the foot. So what they'll do is they want to watch the foot, and so oftentimes they'll just not put the muscle relaxants to the foot. However they do it, I believe they do some kind of cuff. But they can watch the foot and watch it contract, but the rest of the body is relatively calm, relatively calm.